I stood in front of the hallway mirror, staring at the woman staring back. I barely recognized her. Her eyes looked dull and lifeless, framed by dark circles that no amount of sleep could erase. Fine lines crept into the corners of her mouth and eyes, and her once vibrant hair, now limp and dull, clung to her face. 15 years ago, that reflection would have shown a bright, spirited girl with dreams and fire in her heart. Today, it was just me, Sarah Whitaker, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone who had disappeared into the background of her own life. I was still staring at my reflection, lost in a haze of exhaustion and disappointment when Brian stormed into the hallway, already half-dressed for the evening. His eyes scanned me from head to toe with an expression I hadn't seen since our early years together. Except now, it was laced with contempt instead of desire. "You can't seriously think you're going to the wedding like that," he scoffed. "No, actually, scratch that. You're not going at all." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me." He adjusted his cufflinks, not even looking at me. "My boss is getting married tonight. This isn't some backyard barbecue. This is a high-end elite event. Everyone there will be bringing women who look like they belong on magazine covers. Tall, glamorous, elegant. You look like a plain gray mouse." I flinched. I don't even know if it was the words themselves or the ease with which he threw them at me that hurt more. My throat tightened, but I couldn't find anything to say. What was I supposed to argue with? That I didn't look like that? That I used to? That I might have once upon a time before years of diapers, dishes, and Brian himself had worn me thin? He kept going. "You just embarrass me, Sarah. I mean, honestly, look at yourself. You can't expect me to bring that into a room full of CEOs, models, and celebrities. You drag me down." I stood there, frozen, the sting of his words slowly seeping in. I thought I'd grown numb over the years, that I'd learned to tune out his remarks, his little jabs, but this cut deeper. "You're staying home," he added firmly. "I'll tell them you're sick or something. That's the best for both of us." I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know how to fight anymore. I had spent the last 15 years cleaning up after him, cooking his meals, ironing his shirts late into the night while the rest of the house slept. I hadn't bought a new dress in years. I couldn't remember the last time I'd even had time to brush my hair without being interrupted, and being home meant I was invisible until he wanted someone to blame or scorn or look down on. He disappeared into his office, slamming the door behind him. I was left alone in the hallway, surrounded by silence and the faint ticking of the old wall clock. My body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled its grip on me. I lowered myself onto the edge of the couch and finally let the tears fall. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady streaks of pain and shame. But the worst part wasn't what Brian said. It was that somewhere, deep down, I had started to believe he was right. I didn't cry because of what Brian had said. I cried because somewhere along the way, I had let him be right. I had let myself become invisible, so much so that even I had stopped seeing myself. That night, after the door closed behind him, I sat in the silence, holding that truth like a stone in my chest. I hadn't just been humiliated by my husband. I had betrayed the girl I used to be. The next morning came like any other. I made breakfast, packed lunches, reminded the kids to grab their backpacks. Brian sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. I wanted to say something, to ask him if he really meant what he said, but the words got caught in my throat. Maybe I wasn't ready yet. The days that followed were thick with tension. We barely spoke, only what was necessary to keep the household running. I tried, once, twice, to bring it up again. I told him that I was his wife, that I had every right to go with him to the wedding, that it wasn't about appearances, it was about respect. But each time I tried, he shut me down with a look or a snort or worse, silence. "You're not going," he said finally one evening, not even looking up from his laptop. "Stop bringing it up. I already told them you're sick. That's that." I almost gave in. I almost let it go. But one night, a few days before the wedding, I walked past my daughter's room. Vera was sitting on the floor, gently fixing a tiny dress onto her favorite doll. She hummed softly to herself, carefully brushing its hair before tucking it into a toy bed. I stood there in the hallway, unnoticed, and something about that moment struck me in a way I hadn't expected. What was I teaching her? What was I showing her every time I stayed quiet? Every time I let her father diminish me? That it was okay to be treated like this? That silence was strength? That shrinking was love? The thoughts burned like fire in my chest. I couldn't let her grow up thinking this was normal. I couldn't let my daughter become a woman who thought love looked like control, like contempt. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say, trying to hold onto the strength that had begun to flicker inside me. By morning, it wasn't just flickering, it was steady. Small but steady. When Brian came down to the kitchen, I waited until the kids had left for school. Then I stood in front of him, met his eyes, and said it as calmly as I could. "I'm going to that wedding, Brian." He looked up, already frowning. "We've been over this. You're not invited. I'm your wife." "I don't need an invitation," I replied. "And if you don't take me, I'll go myself. I'll show up alone, and I'll tell everyone exactly why I had to." His expression changed instantly, surprise flashing into anger. He wasn't used to this version of me, the one who stood tall, the one who didn't flinch. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "I would," I said, my voice firm. "Try me." For the first time in a very long time, I saw something other than indifference in his eyes. I saw fear. Brian stood there for a long time, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Then he let out a short, bitter laugh and said, "Fine, you win." My heart skipped. "But on one condition," he added coldly. "You don't go with me. You take a cab, and you arrive at least 2 hours after the ceremony starts. After everyone's already relaxed, tipsy, distracted. You come in quietly, sit at the farthest table in the back, and keep a low profile. I don't want your presence turning heads." He said it like he was throwing me a bone, a crumb of acceptance after stripping me of every last shred of dignity. A knot formed in my throat, but I nodded. It wasn't ideal. It was insulting. But for the first time in years, I'd stood up for myself. And this, pitiful as it might seem, was a small victory. My foot in the door. When he left for work, slamming the door behind him, I sank into the armchair in the living room. My whole body felt drained. The argument had taken more out of me than I'd expected. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. Without thinking, I scrolled through my contacts and tapped on a name I hadn't called in a while. "Marina." My voice cracked as soon as she answered. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She could tell immediately. I didn't even have to explain. That's the kind of friend she was. I broke down, told her everything. The insult, the wedding, the so-called condition. I could hear her breathing shift, growing heavier with each word. "Don't move," she said, her voice low and firm. "We're coming over." "We?" I asked. "Svetlana's with me. Just wait." Svetlana, my other closest friend since high school. Bold, confident, always dressed like she walked straight out of a fashion spread. She worked as a buyer for a luxury boutique and had a sixth sense for style. The two of them had watched me fade for years, begging me to leave Brian, calling him a tyrant more times than I could count. And I had always defended him, made excuses, but not today. Less than 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marina with a massive makeup case in one hand and Svetlana hauling several garment bags behind her. Svetlana stepped inside, kicked off her heels, and narrowed her eyes. "All right, soldier," she said. "Wipe those tears. Operation Cinderella begins now." I laughed through the lump in my throat, unsure whether to cry harder or collapse into their arms. Marina hugged me tightly. Let's remind that man exactly what kind of mouse he married. And just like that, everything began to change. The living room turned into a whirlwind of fabric, brushes, and laughter. Svetlana unzipped the garment bags and revealed 3 breathtaking evening gowns. One was made of deep navy silk, sprinkled with tiny crystals that shimmered like stars. Another, emerald green with an asymmetrical cut and a daring but elegant slit. The last one, a blush pink creation, so delicate it looked like a cloud of rose petals. "These are designer pieces," I whispered, stunned. Svetlana grinned. "And you think we'd send you into battle in a bathrobe? Try them on." I slipped into the emerald green one first. As I turned to face the mirror, I gasped. The dress hugged my waist and flowed over my hips like it had been made for me. I hadn't worn anything this beautiful in, I couldn't even remember when. Maybe my wedding day. Marina got to work immediately, opening her massive makeup case like a surgeon preparing for surgery. "First, we treat the skin. Hydration. Glow. We want you to shine from the inside out." I sat in the chair like a mannequin as she layered primer, foundation, and soft highlighter onto my skin. Her fingers moved quickly, expertly, brushing and blending. "We'll go with a smoky eye, subtle, not dramatic, just enough to make your eyes look endless. And the lips, something berry-toned. Something bold but classic." I caught glimpses of myself as she worked, each stroke of color bringing a new piece of me back to life. Meanwhile, Svetlana rifled through boxes of shoes and accessories, finally holding up a pair of strappy heels and a matching clutch. "These," she said, placing them beside me, "belong on someone who knows her worth." Then came the hair. They washed it with some kind of gloss-enhancing shampoo and blow-dried it into soft, voluminous waves. No stiff updos, no overdone curls, just natural beauty, elevated. By the time they were done, I wasn't allowed to look in the mirror. "Not yet," Marina said. "We have one last step." They led me upstairs to the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I closed my eyes, heart racing. "Okay," Svetlana said. "Now." I opened them, and I froze. Staring back at me wasn't the exhausted mother of 2 who hadn't bought a new lipstick in years. It wasn't the woman who had begged her husband for scraps of affection. It was me, the me I thought I'd lost, but brighter, stronger, radiating something I hadn't felt in so long: power, confidence, beauty. My eyes shimmered beneath the smoky tones. My skin glowed. The gown fit like second skin. The heels made me stand taller, not just physically, but emotionally. I looked like I belonged in that world Brian was so desperate to keep me out of. "Mom," a small voice said behind me. I turned. My son, Fedor, stood in the doorway, eyes wide, holding his toy truck loosely at his side. "You look like a princess," he said in awe. Something inside me broke and healed all at once. I knelt down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart." As I walked down the stairs and out the door that evening, I wasn't just heading to a wedding. I was stepping into a version of myself I hadn't known I still had. I wasn't afraid anymore. The car pulled up just outside the gates of the country club, its polished stone entrance glowing under a sea of string lights and soft chandeliers. I had asked the driver to stop a little farther down the road. It was part of the deal, after all. Brian's humiliating condition: arrive late, keep a low profile, don't draw attention. He wanted me to sneak in like a shameful secret, but I had no intention of sneaking. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking steadily against the stone path. The cool air kissed my skin through the silk of the emerald dress, but instead of shivering, I welcomed it. It kept me alert, grounded. As I approached the grand entrance, 2 security guards turned to glance at me. One straightened, the other blinked twice. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored door, tall, composed, every strand of hair perfectly in place, makeup untouched, gaze steady. Svetlana's voice echoed in my mind, "Walk like you own the room." The moment I crossed the threshold into the ballroom, it felt as if someone had turned the volume down. Dozens of voices, chatter, laughter, the clinking of glasses. suddenly faded into a hush. All eyes turned toward me. In that enormous hall lined with golden sconces, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers, I could feel the attention ripple like a wave. Heads tilted. Conversations halted. Someone dropped a fork. One man turned. Then another. Then an entire table. And there I stood, the woman who was never supposed to be noticed. The woman who was told to stay invisible. The woman Brian was ashamed of. Now she was the center of the room. I didn't flinch. I didn't fidget. I held my chin high and moved through the room with quiet confidence, just like Marina had coached me. From across the ballroom, I spotted Brian. He was standing near the groom, his boss, and a few other high-ranking colleagues. They were laughing at something, drinks in hand. But as the hush spread, Brian's eyes followed the shift in the crowd. He turned and saw me. His smile evaporated. His mouth opened slightly, brows furrowing as if his brain couldn't quite register what his eyes were seeing. There was no recognition, just disbelief. Because in that moment, he didn't see his tired housewife. He saw a woman who didn't belong to him anymore. Before he could move, someone stepped into my path. "Forgive me," a rich voice said with a southern lilt, smooth as velvet, "but I don't believe we've been introduced." I looked up to see a man in a tailored navy suit, tall, composed, hair slightly graying at the temples. His eyes, warm, intelligent, met mine with curiosity, not arrogance. "I'm Daniel Montgomery," he said, offering me a glass of champagne. Best man, lifelong friend of the groom. "Sarah," I replied, accepting the drink. My fingers brushed his, warm, steady. He held my gaze for a moment, then smiled. "Sarah, that's a lovely name. Fitting." "Fitting?" I asked, for someone who just stole the room. My cheeks flushed, but I didn't look away. "Are you here alone?" he asked. "My husband's here," I said, nodding toward the far end of the room where Brian now stood frozen, watching us with a darkening expression. Daniel followed my gaze, his smile faltering for just a second. "Well," he said, lifting his glass, "if he's not by your side, he's either very foolish or very brave." I didn't answer. I just sipped the champagne and smiled. Daniel didn't leave my side. We drifted between conversations, and every time someone tried to pull him away, he gently redirected back to me. But he wasn't clinging or performative. He was simply present, completely. He asked about my interests, not my husband. About my favorite movies, books, whether I liked museums. I told him I used to paint still lives, mostly, though I hadn't touched a brush in years. "That's a shame," he said, leaning in just enough for me to catch his cologne. Subtle, expensive, comforting. "You look like someone who sees beauty in things others overlook." No one had said something like that to me in, I didn't know how long. Then the music shifted. The lights dimmed slightly, and the band began playing a soft, lilting waltz, something timeless and slow. Daniel turned toward me, extended his hand with a slight bow. "May I?" I hesitated. For a heartbeat, I glanced across the room. Brian stood like a statue, arms crossed over his chest, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. "Good." I placed my hand in Daniel's, and he led me onto the dance floor. His hand settled lightly at my waist, the other clasping mine, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I allowed myself to let go, to lean into someone's arms and just breathe. The music moved through us, and so did something else, something warm and thrilling and terrifying. We weren't the only ones watching. People whispered. Some smiled. I heard a few chuckles from Brian's circle of colleagues. "Brian's been hiding her all this time. She's stunning. Man's got a real queen at home." Brian's ears turned crimson. And I didn't care. For those few minutes on the dance floor, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a housewife. I wasn't someone's burden or embarrassment. I was just a woman, a beautiful woman. When the music ended, the applause rippled through the room. Even the bride and groom came over. "Daniel," the groom laughed. You always find the most beautiful woman in the room." He turned to me. "Sarah, you were radiant." I smiled politely, but before I could respond, Brian appeared beside me. His smile was tight, his hand grabbing my arm just above the elbow. "Thanks," he said, voice flat. "We're heading home now." He didn't wait for an answer, just started pulling me toward the exit. I waved a soft goodbye to Daniel. His eyes stayed on mine, steady and reassuring, as I disappeared into the night. The ride home was silent. Brian gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could hear the leather creaking. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, my heartbeat still caught somewhere between euphoria and dread. The moment we stepped into the house, it exploded. "What the hell was that?" he spat, slamming the door shut. "You embarrassed me. Throwing yourself at some rich jerk like a desperate." "I didn't throw myself at anyone," I said calmly. "He asked me to dance." "He had his hands all over you." "No," I replied, my voice low but unshaken. "He had his hand on my waist, just like every other couple dancing." "You looked ridiculous," he barked, stepping closer. "Like some overdone." "Say it," I challenged. "Say what you really want to say." His eyes narrowed, and then his fingers dug into my arm hard. "You think a dress and some makeup change what you are? You're still nothing, Sarah. Just a gray mouse in a prettier box." Something inside me snapped. I wrenched my arm free, and for the first time in 15 years, I looked him straight in the eyes and didn't flinch. "No, Brian," I said coldly. "I'm not the one who's nothing. You are." The next morning, I woke with a dull ache in my arm where Brian had grabbed me. There was a faint red mark, not quite a bruise, but it lingered like a stain. I sat on the edge of the bed in my robe, staring at the vanity across the room. The makeup had long since been washed away, the dress folded back into its garment bag. But the woman who had looked in the mirror last night, she still lingered somewhere beneath my skin. As I reached for my clutch to get my phone, something small and stiff slid out from the side pocket. A card. I picked it up and stared at the embossed lettering. Daniel Montgomery, Montgomery Properties, Charlotte, North Carolina, a phone number beneath. He must have slipped it into my hand at the end of the night, so discreetly I hadn't even noticed. Just a moment of warmth, his fingers brushing mine as we said goodbye. I hadn't thought anything of it then, but now, holding the card, I felt something stir. Something dangerous. Something electric. I shouldn't. I was still married, but I also wasn't living. The urge to text him sat in my chest like a held breath. I paced the kitchen, phone in hand, typing and deleting the same message over and over. "Thank you for last night." Too vague. "It was nice meeting you." Too formal. Finally, I just wrote what I meant. "Hi, it's Sarah. Thank you for everything." I hit send and immediately regretted it. My heart pounded in my throat. What if he didn't reply? What if he thought I was chasing him? What if, ding? His response came in less than a minute. "Sarah, I was hoping you'd reach out. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. May I call you sometime?" I stared at the screen, the words glowing like a soft light. Over the next few days, we didn't speak by phone, but we texted. Long, slow conversations that stretched from morning to night. He asked questions, but never pried. He never pushed. He listened. He told me about his love for photography, how he traveled often for work, how he sometimes went weeks without seeing anyone who truly looked him in the eye. And then he asked me, one evening, what made me happy. I hesitated before typing. I used to paint. Still lives. Landscapes. I haven't done it in years. He replied, "Do you have any of your work? I'd love to see it." After staring at the screen for a long time, I sent him a photo of an old painting I'd done. Fruit in a cracked ceramic bowl. Shadows curling like smoke across a weathered wooden table. His response came instantly. "Sarah, that's incredible. You have real talent. You can't let it die. You should paint again. For yourself. Not for anyone else." I felt something shift in me. The way he saw me, really saw me, was like being watered after years of drought. He didn't want anything from me. He didn't pity me. He just believed I could be more. And slowly, I started to believe it too. The decision didn't come in a single moment. It came quietly like a tide rolling in. A slow accumulation of nights I spent texting Daniel, mornings waking up next to a man who didn't see me, afternoons when the silence in the house was heavier than the noise ever had been. One evening, I waited for Brian to come home from work. I sat in the living room, the kids already at my sister's for the night. I wore no makeup, no special dress, just jeans and a soft sweater. Nothing about me screamed rebellion, except my resolve. He stepped inside, loosened his tie, and barely looked at me before heading to the kitchen. "Brian," I said calmly. He turned. "I'm filing for divorce." He laughed, actually laughed, loud and sharp, like I had just told a joke. "You," he scoffed. "And go where, Sarah? With what money? Who's going to take care of you? That guy from the wedding." I didn't answer. "You really think he wants you? A woman with 2 kids and baggage? Please, he'll get bored in a month, and you'll come crawling back." "Even if that happens," I said quietly, "I'd still rather be alone than here." His smile faded. I stood up and walked past him, not even looking back. The next day, I called Marina. Within 20 minutes, she and Svetlana were at my door. Trunk open, boxes ready, no questions asked. We packed quickly. Essentials only. Clothes. Art supplies I hadn't touched in years. A photo album. Vera's favorite stuffed bear. Fedor's sketchpad. They didn't cry. They didn't ask why. Somehow, even at their young age, they knew. We left before Brian came home. For the first time in 15 years, I shut the door behind me, and it felt like I was locking a cell from the outside. Daniel was patient. He didn't push me to move in with him. He understood I needed space, time healing, but he supported me in every way that mattered. He hired a top divorce attorney, someone fierce and unshakable, who helped me file properly, secure child support, and protect our assets. Brian tried to fight, of course. Threats, insults, manipulation. But the lawyer shut him down at every turn. I never had to speak to him directly again. Daniel helped me find a small apartment near the kids' school. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, safe. He bought Vera a reading nook filled with her favorite books. He took Fedor to soccer practice on weekends. Not to replace their father, but simply to show up, consistently. Meanwhile, I, Sarah Whitaker, the gray mouse, signed up for night classes in graphic design. I was terrified, but I showed up. Every evening after tucking the kids in, I studied. I watched tutorials. I drew again. I designed flyers, mock-ups, color palettes. It felt like remembering how to breathe. One of my instructors pulled me aside one day and said, "You've got something rare." And a voice. "Don't waste it." Those words stayed with me. A few months later, I landed a junior design position at a boutique agency in uptown Charlotte. Small team, big dreams. They welcomed me like I belonged there, like I had something to offer. Because I did. My life was no longer built around surviving Brian's moods. It was built around becoming me again. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. It didn't happen with a grand gesture or fireworks. Daniel didn't rent out a restaurant or fly me somewhere exotic. One evening, we were having dinner at a small lakeside cafe just outside Charlotte. The kids were there, laughing over their desserts. The sun was setting in warm tones across the water, and everything felt soft. Safe. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since the moment you walked into that ballroom, wearing that green dress and changing the temperature of the entire room." I smiled, already misty-eyed. "I love your children like they're mine, and I love the way you see the world. I want to spend the rest of my life seeing it with you." Then he pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, not dramatic, and inside was the most delicate ring I'd ever seen. Simple, elegant, thoughtful, just like him. Sarah Whitaker, will you marry me? I didn't even need to think. I whispered, yes, as the kids cheered and wrapped their arms around us. A few months later, we moved into a house we picked together, a charming, craftsman-style home tucked into a quiet neighborhood filled with oak trees and flower beds. It had a wraparound porch, a big kitchen, and, most importantly, an upstairs room with floor-to-ceiling windows. It became my studio. Daniel filled it with easels, brushes, canvases, and shelves of watercolor paper and oil paints. I spent hours there, sunlight flooding the walls, music humming low from the speakers. I painted again, for real this time, not just to remember who I was, but to create who I was becoming. The kids thrived. Fedor joined a local art club. Vera started ballet. Our home was filled with music, messy dinners, half-finished puzzles, and love. So much love, it spilled out of every doorway. Brian, meanwhile, unraveled. He tried to maintain the image for a while, showing up to work with his polished shoes and stiff collar, telling people he was better off, that I had run away with some rich guy. But the truth caught up. His co-workers heard the full story. His boss, the same man whose wedding we had attended, eventually sat him down and said, I thought you were a decent man. Turns out, you just didn't deserve the woman you had. Brian lost his job a few months later, not because of me, but because the foundation of his life, the one I had quietly maintained, was gone. No more crisp shirts ironed before dawn. No more hot dinners waiting. No more steady wife to keep his life from falling apart. He tried dating again, but it never lasted. He grew bitter, angrier. He started drinking. Friends stopped calling. Invitations stopped coming. One afternoon, nearly 2 years later, I was walking out of a cafe with Daniel and the kids. We were laughing about something, Vera's marshmallow mustache or Fedor's awful joke, I don't even remember. But as we stepped onto the sidewalk, I saw him. Brian. He was across the street, leaning against a lamppost, paper cup in hand, clothes wrinkled, face pale and sunken. He didn't say anything. He didn't call out. He just stared. And I knew he recognized what he had lost. Not just a wife, not just a family, but a life that could have been. He had thrown it all away for pride, for control, for ego. And now justice had been served. Not by vengeance, not by courtroom drama, but by life itself. He stood alone on that sidewalk, watching the family he could have had disappear around the corner, into a future he would never be part of. And me? I never looked back.